Good afternoon.
My dear, my darling.
Have an excellent lunch. Well then, guess whose hands the federal police indictment against Flávio Bolsonaro ended up in? This guy is really unlucky, isn't he? It ended up in Justice Alexandre de Moraes' hands. The federal police investigated and indicted Flávio Bolsonaro for the crime of slander against Lula. This went to the Supreme Federal Court, and by random assignment, it landed in Minister Alexandre de Moraes' lap. What did Alexandre de Moraes do? He summoned the Attorney General of the Republic to give a statement within 15 days. What happened? Flávio Bolsonaro made a post saying that Lula was a supporter of terrorists and drug traffickers along with the government of Venezuela, and he posted this on his social media. This ended up through the Ministry of Justice as a criminal complaint where the federal police investigated and concluded that Flávio Bolsonaro committed the crime of slander against the President of the Republic. This ended up in Minister Alexandre de Moraes' office, and Alexandre de Moraes has now notified the Attorney General. Here, look. Moraes gives the Attorney General's office 15 days to respond. Whether Flávio slandered Lula or not, in other words, the Attorney General will say, in his opinion, whether Flávio Bolsonaro committed the crime or not against the President of the Republic. The crime of slander carries a small sentence from 1 to 4 years. It's not a small sentence, but there's a catch. When the crime is committed against the President of the Republic, then there is an aggravating factor. The sentence is a bit higher, okay? Let's see what the Prosecutor General says. If you think about it, the Attorney General might understand that it wasn't slander, that it was defamation, which is a bit less serious, you know? Let's wait to hear what the Attorney General says. Now, this progress is very important because we are on the eve of an election. And it's important for the courts to make it clear how far a person can go, because otherwise the courts will lose control over these attacks from both sides. So this clarification will be very important on the part of the Supreme Federal Court, even to create a barrier there that maybe the main court that should create it might not create, which is exactly the TSC, the Superior Electoral Court, to prevent this kind of abuse in the expression of thought. Freedom of expression in Brazil is free. There is broad freedom, but there are limits. There is censorship, which is what? The rights of others. Insult, slander, defamation, incitement to crime, threat, these are crimes, and there is no freedom of expression for that. So we have to make this very clear, especially now, close to the elections, so that there aren't so many abuses. Isn't that right? For me, he did commit it, especially because he posted it on his social media, and his post was shared thousands of times. So that's even more serious. He has to be held accountable for it. But that's just my opinion, right, guys? Actually, I want to know where the movie's money is. Where did the movie's money go? I want to know about that. Hey, Andrea Gonçalves, for God's sake, nothing at all so far? What are you waiting for? To destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, or coordinate testimonies? Is that it, Andrea Gonçalves? Because for God's sake, what's fair for one has to be fair for all. Where is it? Where are Daniel Borcaro's millions? Stolen money. Stolen money. Where are Daniel Borcaro's millions? The money he stole that went to the movie. And what about the money that didn't go to the movie? Where did the money go? That's what I want to know. Because meanwhile, Eduardo Bolsonaro, who doesn't have a job, who gave up a salary of almost 50,000 reais here in Brazil in February or March of last year, is living a rich life, living in a 6 million house. And he was at the Brazil game yesterday. The ticket, 180,000 reais for the ticket. Who's paying for that? Huh? Guys, look here, guys. What a shameless thing is this, like this? Did Borcaro pay? Eduardo Bolsonaro watches Brazil's game in the VIP area, where the ticket costs 180,000. His appearance in a luxury area comes amid questions about how Eduardo Bolsonaro has supported himself in the United States since 2025. Bolsonaro supporters say, Andrea Gonçalves, that Neymar paid for it, but that's false. Neymar didn't pay for anything. Neymar never said he paid for anything. That's just a tall tale. Let me ask you, was it Daniel Borcaro who paid the 180,000 here? Because money doesn't grow on trees. If it did, there would be a tree. Everyone would have a money tree at home, but it doesn't. Who's funding Eduardo Bananina over there in the United States? Who's funding also the fugitive Alexandra Ramaj over there in the United States? I've always told you from the beginning, we have to find out who's funding Eduardo Bolsonaro's big party in the United States. If we find that out, we'll find out who belongs to this criminal organization and where they stole the money from. We already know, based on all indications, Daniel Borcaro, by all indications, is footing the bill. And the money that was supposed to go to the movie seems to have gone somewhere else. In fact, we already know it went somewhere else. It went to a fund in the United States, in Texas, where Eduardo Bolsonaro lives actually in a 6 million real mansion. And the owner of this fund, the person responsible for this fund, is Eduardo Bolsonaro's lawyer, Paulo Carlisto. And to this day, they haven't accounted for the money that was supposed to go to the movie. Where is the accounting for the movie, guys? I ask you, who paid for Dudu Bananina's 180,000 ticket in the United States? Where he doesn't have a job? He doesn't. He left his job here in Brazil, where he used to make almost 50,000 reais a month. Who's paying for the house in Texas too? A little house worth 6 million reais. Just pull one feather and the whole scheme will come out. And there are people who say, no, I support the Bolsonaros because they're not corrupt. My dear, either you're really dumb or you have some kind of problem. Because if this isn't corruption, because I've already told you, to earn your salary, you have to work. You have to work, otherwise you don't get paid. Where does this people's money come from? And I'm not talking about a little money, I'm talking about a lot of money. Give me a break, right? Stop being such a fool. Meanwhile, there are people who are against ending the 6-day shift. Who, Andrea? Flávio Bolsonaro. Flávio Bolsonaro has already stated that he's against ending the 6-day 6x1 shift, but he doesn't work. He's a senator of the Republic, earns almost 50,000 reais a month. Besides the other benefits, perks, fuel allowance, clothing allowance, housing allowance, office budget, parliamentary quota, amendments. Yeah, I'm not talking about millions. The guy's not going to work? And this guy is against ending the 6x1 shift schedule for you, worker? Look here, guys, give me a break. No, there's no way, no. 43 absences. How much would Flávio Bolsonaro earn if he got paid under the slavery PC? Guys, what is this? The slavery PEC, Andrea Gonçalves, the 7x0 PEC he's talking about. He is in favor of a PEC, a proposed parliamentary amendment against the PEC to end the 6x1 shift schedule. Then they presented the PEC known as the slavery PEC, or by some also known as the 7x0 shift piece, where you only get paid for the hours you work. How much would he earn if he were under this spec that he supports? No, almost 40% he didn't work. Like in a month, 30 days, he should have worked 30 days, but he only worked 15 days. How much would he earn? What? Because their PEC is like this. In this setup, you'll arrive at work and the boss will say, I don't need you today. You have no rights, you're screwed. On the day he needs you, the boss says you can come for just 2 hours. You work those 2 hours and then leave. And he's here, look. How much would he make? He'd have no salary. He opposes ending the 6x-1 schedule. These people are an absolute disgrace, guys, for God's sake. But in the meantime, hey, the market, Faria Lima is already giving in and realizing that Lula is going to win for the 4th time. Because they were hoping Flávio would catch on. But Flavio is just sinking. First, it was about the audio being revealed of him asking Daniel Volcaro for money, even though he said he didn't even know Daniel Volcaro. And then he was demanding millions of reais from Daniel Volcaro, even though they received more than 60 million reais from Daniel Volcaro, stolen money. Then his popularity dropped in the polls. And now comes this other blow from Michelle Bolsonaro, really going after him. Losing votes among women and evangelicals, so it's all going downhill. Now, Faria Lima, the market, and everyone else are already seeing that Lula is going to win for the fourth time. What are they doing? They're already moving closer to Lula. To try, like, since we're not against him, let's just join in, because what else are we going to do? The right, the center, and the far right can't even come up with a candidate to make Lula break a sweat. So there's no way. This came out in Global. After Flavio's decline, Faria Lima is already starting to treat Lula as the favorite and is starting to try to get closer to Lula. Because they're seeing that the way things are going, Lula will win in the first round. That's the reality. You can write it down. Lula, four-time winner, first round. Yeah, there's no way around it, guys. These people live in glass houses. There's no way around it. Let's quickly look at a few statements. Please like the video. It's important. Now, let's watch an archived video of Maritim, a federal deputy, discussing the 6-on, 1-off work schedule issue. I also want to share a few comments with you. Pay attention here. Look here.
First of all, I think it's a huge step forward for us to be able to guarantee everyone 2 days off per week and a reduction of the work week from 44 to 40 hours. Do you remember back in '88 during the Constituent Assembly, that's when it was reduced from 48 to 44 hours. It's been 38 years. And in these 38 years, we've had huge advances in technology, increase in productivity. Somehow this increase in productivity has to result in an improvement in the quality of life for people and families. But we also have to make all the necessary adjustments to ensure that the economy keeps functioning. So our concern, the government's concern in particular, is with the issue of small and micro businesses, right? To ensure that they have the conditions to survive with this change, right? Because large companies will adapt. First, I think it's a big step forward for us to be able to.
I also think it's an important step forward. You as a worker having the right to 2 days off a week, just 1 day, guys, is too little. It's too little. It's not enough. What it does is make you even more tired. When you rest just 1 day, you still have to tidy up, run errands, and do everything. So you're even more tired the next day. So you need to have 2 days to really rest, at least for real, truly. Because on the other days, you have to run around taking care of things at home. That's true. Yeah, doing laundry, cleaning the house. So the other day is really your only time to rest. And guys, nothing is going to bankrupt anyone. No one is going to go bankrupt. That's just nonsense. When the 13th salary was established, the barons, the elite, they said Brazil would go bankrupt if there was a 13th salary, this and that. All just nonsense. No one's going to go bankrupt, really. Now, we have to stay alert because this resistance movement by Davi Alcolumbre reveals who Davi Alcolumbre really is. Davi Alcolumbre, president of the Senate, is holding back the constitutional amendment to prevent it from starting its process in the Senate. And all of this, according to Globo itself, is because he wanted Lula's protection from the federal police who are investigating him. Because Daniel Volcaro himself implicated him in his latest cooperation deal, which wasn't accepted because he's protecting other people, where he said he paid 155 million reais in bribes to Davi Alcolumbre. He went to Lula, who said he wouldn't interfere with the federal police. And whoever was involved would have to face the consequences. After that, he switched sides, that guy. He put Lula's veto on the sentencing up to be overturned, and it was overturned. The sentencing guidelines were sanctioned, became law, and the reduction of sentences for the January 8 coup plotters for everyone, including Bolsonaro, became law. Then, when it was time to apply the law, the Supreme Federal Court suspended its application because a direct action of unconstitutionality was filed before the Supreme Federal Court. So until the final judgment on the sentencing guidelines law, which was approved, its application is suspended until the Supreme Court decides on this situation. In fact, it's very likely that Alexandre de Moraes will bring this up in August or September so that the plenary can decide whether the sentencing guidelines law is valid or not, whether it is constitutional or not. But Davi Alcolumbre made all these moves so that Lula's veto would be overturned in the Senate. Then afterwards, he made all the moves so that Jorge Mesias would be rejected. In over 100 years, it was the first time that the person nominated by the President of the Republic, the Supreme Federal Court Minister, was rejected by the Senate. Why? Because Davi Alcolumbre wanted to show power to Lula. Like, look, if you don't help me with this situation at the federal police investigation, I'm going to make your life difficult. He approved some explosive agendas, creating expenses for Lula's government without a funding source, totally unconstitutional. It was all about bulldozing it through, creating expenses for the government without having the revenue source to pay for those expenses. That's unconstitutional and will go to the Supreme Court, which will overturn everything since it's not allowed. Whenever there is a bill or a proposed amendment to the Constitution that creates expenses for the government, whether municipal, state, or federal, there has to be a source for where the money to pay for that expense will come from. It has to be in the bill, for it to be approved. If it's not there, it's unconstitutional. And he did all that to get it approved. It was approved because he wants the government to establish some kind of protection for him. And the government is going to do that. So now the idea is to hold back, to not move forward with the processing of the constitutional amendment proposal, which has already been approved in the Chamber of Deputies, that establishes the end of the 6 days on, 1 day off schedule. He doesn't advance it, and only he can. He has to start the process for it to be approved. And he's using this to try to blackmail the Lula government. So this movement is also important because we can see who's who. Davi Alcolumbre, who claimed to be a Democrat, right? Claimed to be a good guy, whatever, who thinks about the public interest, is actually just trying to save himself. Because pretty soon at this rate, the federal police might come knocking at his door. And if things keep going the way they are, he'll end up in jail. And he's trying to blackmail Lula's government. And Lula said he won't accept any situation like that. And that he won't interfere with the federal police in any way. Interesting, isn't it? Meanwhile, Flávio, right? He was humiliated by the United States, right, guys? He offered the transition government to the Trump administration if he won the elections. Oh my God. Pedro Rousseff gives us some important clarification here. Pay attention. Hit the like button.
Bolsonaro must believe Brazilians are very gullible, because after all his and his family's efforts to intervene in Donald Trump's government, to tax Brazilian companies and destabilize Lula's government, now he comes and says he never asked for any taxes. He even goes to the United States again to beg Trump to remove the heavy tariffs against Brazil. What he didn't expect is that we have, besides just words, proof that he and his brother worked for the tariffs in Brazil. Watch this video and share it as much as you can, so we can defeat this lying narrative from the rabid herd once again.
President Trump, get back with the Magnitsky Global Act. These guys are human rights violators. And after me, if one day in the next election a radical left administration comes back here in the US, they will be together, persecuting not only you but all the people around you in the administration. So it's time to clean up the mess in Brazil, and we count on our allies overseas.
Flávio Bolsonaro must believe Brazilians are truly gullible, considering everything he and his family have done.
Yeah, to achieve the tariff hike, to get sanctions and all that. And then came Marco Rubio's letter in response. This letter, it's being used for a criminal complaint against Eduardo Bolsonaro and Flávio Bolsonaro for an attack against our sovereignty, This letter clearly shows that Flávio Bolsonaro is kind of a candidate not for the Brazilian people, not for Brazil's interests, not even for Brazil, that he is being a candidate for a foreign government to interfere here in Brazil. This is absurd. This is unacceptable. I never thought I would see a situation like this, right? This is absurd. And this criminal complaint is being filed with the federal police regarding this. This is an attack on our sovereignty, you see? It's collusion. It's a conspiracy against our territory, against our sovereignty, especially from Flávio Bolsonaro. This can't be accepted, folks. We can't normalize this kind of situation, because if we do, the tendency is for it to get worse. And the attitudes and behaviors of betraying the country will only keep increasing. This can't be accepted or normalized. This is betrayal of the country. This is espionage. This is an attack on our sovereignty. This cannot be accepted as normal. And I sincerely hope that the courts will pursue this. In fact, speaking of the justice system, Paulo Gonet has just officially released his decision regarding the latest one. The second, right? I don't know if it will be the last, surprisingly, but it's the second attempt by Daniel Vorcaro to strike a cooperation agreement. Paulo Gonet has just issued a ruling, and officially Paulo Gonet did not accept Daniel Vorcaro's proposal for a cooperation agreement. This is the second proposal for a cooperation agreement he has submitted. And Paulo Gonet makes it very clear that based on what the federal police already knows, has already found, and is currently investigating, Daniel Vorcaro is protecting people. And that he hasn't told everything. And that what he did say, the federal police is already well on track with. So his plea bargain will carry no weight, and it was not accepted. They say that Daniel Vorcaro is talking about trying again to strike a cooperation agreement. But now the federal police are even stricter, and so is the Attorney General. And soon it won't be possible to enter into a cooperation agreement anymore. So what will he be able to do to try to reduce his sentence, Andrea Gonçalves? Is there anything he can do? Yes, there is. Confession. Confession is different from cooperating with prosecutors. He can make a confession, confess, no, I really did this. I did this and that with this person, that person, and so on. I regret it, and so on. I will pay for what I owe. But I want to confess and talk and so on to try to reduce the sentence. Because when it comes to cooperating with prosecutors, he's still holding back. And it won't be accepted. Okay, let's listen a bit to what Otoni says here, which I found interesting. His statement here. Let's see here. Pay attention. Oops, let me turn up the volume here.
The weight that God has placed on us, pastors and leaders, to preach the gospel, to preach the principles of the word of the Lord, because this is the greatest civic awareness that a human being who attends church can have. Hey everyone, how are you? Otoni De Paula here. They asked me to analyze this video. I will do it. Pay attention. In just a moment, I'll comment only on the video.
Because the communists were so cunning, that they figured out how to create a kind of theology, which is liberation theology, in order to undermine religion itself and turn religion into a tool for political purposes.
In other words,
They even thought about that. So the omission of religious people today in Brazil, for me, is infinitely more blameworthy than any imperfection of Bolsonaro.
folks, once again, the old rhetoric of a political movement that decided to make the body of Christ, the church, its electoral base. And so I ask the leaders, pastors, priests, not to fall for this talk that you need to use the altar to make people aware of communism. Well, first of all, this thing about warning people about communism is actually making the same mistake we made back then. And that divided the church so much, that separated the church so much, which is to point out that there is only one solution for us to stop communism: the Bolsonaro family, as if they were sent by God to save the nation. First of all, what communism, right? We've already had 20 years of left-wing government in Brazil, and that so-called communism never showed up. It's not that I don't have criticisms of left-wing governments. I do, just like I also have criticisms of right-wing governments. God isn't on any ideological side, but they want to convince us otherwise. And then when he says that communism is using or uses religion as a political tool, it's that old story. Accuse others of what you're guilty of yourself. In other words, that's actually what Bolsonarism did with the churches. They used and still use the churches today as their political tool. You know that I was once part of that movement, and I myself feel responsible for what happened. This division, this shaming of brothers in Christ who just because they didn't vote for Bolsonaro were excluded as if they deserved hell. That's absurd. So that's just a narrative to try to deceive the leaders, the pastors or priests, and try to put a burden on you that God didn't place. There is only one burden that God placed on us pastors and leaders: to preach the gospel, to preach the principles of the word of the Lord, because that is the greatest civic awareness that a human being who attends church can have.
Yes, that's it. And we have to be very careful, everyone, especially this year, with those who manipulate faith, with the wolves in sheep's clothing within religious communities. And actually, they will keep talking about politics inside the church. They will keep talking about politics inside religious temples and forget about Christ. Christ doesn't have a political ideology. Then they come with this communist scare. Communism, I don't know what else. It's all just talk to fool people and herd the masses. So be careful, okay? When someone starts with that stuff in your church, just say, look, I came here to worship Christ. I'm here to praise God. I'm not here to talk about politics or any of that stuff. No, I don't think this is the right place for that. Shall we pray? Shall we pray to Jesus? And go hard on it, because it's unacceptable. But at the same time, we can't avoid making a criticism, right? Because Antonio de Paula, this congressman, supported Bolsonaro. And he was blind for a while, right? He was blind and he supported Bolsonaro. He supported this whole situation. This shows how dangerous religious fundamentalism is, which leads and manipulates people, no matter how much good faith they have. And it's interesting that Antonio de Paula went to a podcast together with the pastor, also a federal deputy, Enrique. Look here at what Enrique said. I want to highlight this statement from Pastor Enrique as well. See here how important it is for us to have this awareness so we are not used and manipulated by anyone. Not by a pastor, not by a priest, not by anyone, not by anyone. And to have your religion and truly worship God according to what you believe without any interference from this kind of situation whose interests are dirty and harmful. And many times what's really going on behind the scenes is shady deals manipulating the masses, the believers, to get votes for this person or that person. And shady deals happening right inside the church itself, inside the religious temple. Look at what Pastor Enrique Vieira pointed out here, which I found very interesting. Pay attention.
The church looked at Bolsonaro and saw redemption. That's what you said about that moment. But at that moment, Bolsonaro already had a history of praising torture and treating torturers as heroes. He had already made statements showing contempt for our sisters, for women. He had already made statements of contempt and disdain for our history as black men and people.
Yes.
He already had a pro-gun mentality, spreading hatred against political opponents. He had already said that the mistake of the dictatorship was killing too few people or torturing instead of killing. He already had all of that. I was never disappointed with Bolsonaro because, given his history, I never expected anything good, sensitive, humane, empathetic, or merciful from him. He has always been like that, shamelessly and publicly, mocking black, indigenous, and Quilombola women, people who disagreed with him, saying that the mistake was torturing and not killing or torturing too little. So I find it hard to understand, as a human being who also needs mercy, how I don't return to him the evil he pours out against us. I don't have that in my heart. But his background is so contrary to democracy, empathy, citizenship, and the spirit of the gospel. The church looked at Bolsonaro and saw redemption. That's what you said about that moment.
Yeah, the congressman tried to explain, Congressman Antonio de Paula, but he said that he really was blind. He became blind. He put Christ aside and became blind because of politics. Right? He was swallowed up by violence, by hatred, by communism, and in the end, he drifted away from God. And he returned and came back to sobriety. He's not left-wing, he's right-wing, but he understands that religion, guys, is one thing. Worshipping Christ is one thing, church is one thing, politics is another thing, and it's a different environment. If only all religious leaders understood that. But unfortunately, some of these religious leaders do exactly the opposite. They use it for shady deals. Sometimes it's a job for the mother, a job for the wife, a job for the daughter, and they make deals with congressmen, make deals with councilmen, make deals with governors, make deals with senators. And he manipulates the believers. Unfortunately, this has happened a lot inside religious temples. So be very careful. You who are inside a religious temple, so you won't be used and manipulated. Because of your good faith, your true desire to worship Christ, and your genuine trust in people, you might end up being used and manipulated literally like cattle. Because unfortunately, this happens a lot, especially in election years. Let this be a warning. Like the live stream, because when you like the live stream, YouTube recommends it to more people. It's really important for us to be aware of this. Okay? Leave your comment. It's very important. And at 4:30 p.m., I'll be back with the clip. At 8 o'clock p.m., I'll answer your question. Kisses. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye. God bless you, everyone.